Welcome to the Patent Behavior Bytes Coffee Break. The mission of the Pennsylvania Training and Technical Assistance Network is to support the efforts and initiatives of the Bureau of Special Education and to build the capacity of local education agencies to serve the students who receive special education services. Our goal is for each child to ensure individualized education program teams begin with a general education setting with the use of supplementary aids and services before considering a more restricted placement. In today's coffee break, we'll be highlighting the work of Dr. Timothy Knoster. Dr. Knoster is the Executive Director of the McDowell Institute and Professor in the Department of Special Education at Bloomsburg University. Dr. Knoster provided a session at the 2019 Implementers Forum on the topic of Preventive Classroom Management, Positive Behavior Support in the Classroom, focusing on Tier 1 universal prevention. This session was extremely popular due to the effective and practical strategies shared. Let's look at some of the highlights from that session that include a description of what are the elements of success in the classroom with our students, understanding classroom management, and foundation of universal prevention in the classroom.
The elements of success in the classroom, and arguably what we're charged with as educators. We really have these two interrelated sets of expectations or goals that we have upon us as adults or as the professionals, and in particular at the classroom. We of course have academic learning outcomes, right? No surprise there. We know that's the primary focus and traditionally the historical focus of teaching reading, writing, math, and the academic content areas. But we also have this other set of what we would call social and emotional learning outcomes, or facilitating social, emotional, and behavioral wellness. And this is always a question I like to ask, particularly with a densely populated group of teachers in a large environment with this. How many of you know of a particular kid right now that you could picture and you could name by name? Please don't call the name out, but you could name by name at least one kid that you have in your classroom that if you don't find a way to address somehow the social and emotional, or what sometimes are referred to as non-academic barriers to learning, and by non-academic barriers to learning, what we're talking about are things that you can't lesson plan your way out of. That no matter how good a lesson plan you create, no matter how good you are at delivering that instructional practice and delivering the curriculum, that there are these other things that get in the way for learning with this particular kid. How many of you know a kid like that if you don't address those issues, the academics are almost unachievable, right? So occasionally I'll find a teacher who will say, I really don't have any of those kids. And I usually say to them, keep that to yourself. Your colleagues don't want to hear that. But it's usually all of us can say one hand up, two hands up in a surrender, or we run out of hands in terms of the number of kids that we know that social emotional learning outcomes are awfully critical. What's really encouraging to me, I will share with you, is that over the course of years, this has been something that a number of people, and we've heard Kathleen Lane a few moments ago talk about these things. These are not new concepts. These are things that have been somewhat known and increasingly talked about in the field of education for some time. But what's really exciting is that social and emotional learning outcomes, or social and emotional behavioral wellness, is actually becoming validated. People are acknowledging and accepting that this is equally as important, and that getting academic learning and achievement is inextricably connected with social emotional learning. You can't get one without the other. We're talking about healthy growth and development of the kids that we work with day in and day out. We can't carve them up into here's the academic content side of little Johnny and here's the social emotional learning side of little Johnny, even though sometimes the way we structure curricula, it almost forces us into thinking that way. But we're actually looking at education increasingly from a holistic lens. And that's really what it's all about. It's about growth and development. So both sets of these learning outcomes are inextricably connected. You can't really separate them out. So nurture is the area that we have the greatest degree of influence over, and that's what we're really going to drill down on here. So let's start to translate or create the bridge between what I just started to ask you to reflect upon in your personal life experiences to classroom management. And I would suggest that the first challenge we have as educators is the language we use in and of itself. Because when I say the word manage, a word you can equate to manage is something like what? Control, exactly, control. And I really do think that the language we use predisposes us as educators to kind of be driving in a certain direction that's not particularly productive. It's not about control. This is a large classroom environment with probably close to 250 people at least in here. I can guarantee you I cannot control for one moment what any one of you as an individual is thinking or what you're going to do, and it would be ridiculous for me to think I could control that. Now, that doesn't mean what I do won't influence your decision making as a quote-unquote professional adult learner at this point in time in this context. But control it's ludicrous to even think about it. And the challenge is, if I'm thinking about, my God, how do I control 250 people? I'm in a police mode. I'm not in an educational mode. And that's not what's really healthy preventative approaches to managing groups of students or classroom management. So I will use the term classroom management throughout today, but when I use that term, please understand what I mean by that is the following. Not control, but in particular, teacher self-management of instructional practice in group settings. So the primary focus here is on managing whose behavior? My own. I don't know about you, but if you're anything like I am, managing my behavior is a full-time job, particularly on a day when I'm not feeling particularly resilient. You know, maybe I'm the only one, but I would imagine that some of you have had days where your fuse is a little shorter than other days. When a particular kid or a colleague or a parent or somebody says something to you that if they had said that to you on Tuesday before, you would have even just ignored it and moved on, but you heard it today and you're like, what? And you're ready to really just like jump and respond. We're human beings first. So we're going to have that roller coaster ride of our own human experience as well. And those are the days when our own self-management really comes into play. So I would argue strongly that effectively and preventatively managing behavior of students in group environments is how good are we at self-management practices about ourselves, because that's really the only place that we can truly be accountable from a control standpoint, is controlling how I respond to the cards that I'm dealt with in my hand at this particular moment in time. And what I do, yes, will influence. So please don't misinterpret to say, we're off the hook with accountability. What we do will influence, but get control out of our mindset. But we can really reduce the level of behavioral noise that we have going on with these pet peeve behaviors that can wear us down over time by putting in place some key, core, foundational, proactive, preventative practices. And that's what we're going to look at here today. In particular, we're going to focus on 3 interrelated preventative approaches in the classroom that are not just consistent, but come from the exact same empirical literature base that all of the school-wide practices come in non-classroom environments. They're going to be rapport building, establishing clear expectations, and positive reinforcement. So right now, I'm going to say right up now, everybody's like disappointed. Well, there's nothing new there. No, there isn't. There's not a darn thing new about any of this stuff. But what we are going to do, and what I'm going to try to do, is try to talk about it perhaps a little differently, or describe these things a little differently than maybe you've heard them described before. And I'm going to talk about the application of these things in a pragmatic, doable manner. In other words, what we're going to do is focus on the translation of what the research says is effective practice, and it is these things, along with other stuff, but these are the 3 core ones. but how do I translate that into a practical sense so it makes sense to me at the classroom level as a classroom teacher? In doing that, we're also going to talk about this balance between prevention and intervention. Or another way to say prevention and intervention, a little less jargony, is proaction and reaction, right? What we want to focus as much as we can on is the preventative, proactive stuff. So let's think about the typical school day for any given classroom teacher. You invest your time and energy in lots and lots and lots of different areas. If this was a retirement plan, you would have an extraordinarily diversified portfolio. It's not like you're just doing one thing and you're doing this and just focusing on this. You're multitasking tons of stuff on a daily basis, right? But one of those core things in that bucket of stuff you manage your time around is behavior management, is classroom management. It's not the only thing, but it is a significant foundational piece to what you do. We want to look at having, ideally, no less than 80% of the time that, say, I as a classroom teacher invest in behavior management, I want to have at least 80% of that invested in proaction and prevention, so that no more than 20% is in intervention or reaction. On a good day, when the kids are really resilient, and I'm really resilient, and everything's just falling together and the stars are aligned, maybe that's 90% and 10%, or 95 and 5 if it's a really cool day.
Please consider the following resources if you would like more information on this topic. The full video can be found on Patton's YouTube channel in the Behavior Bytes playlist, session 42, Preventive Classroom Management, Positive Behavior Support in the Classroom. You can also visit the McDowell Institute website at bloomu.edu/McDowell, where you will find information on the McDowell Institute's mission, topics on fostering social, emotional, and behavioral wellness in education, along with the Institute's initiatives and outreach programs. As always, thank you for sharing your time with us today, and remember that this is just a bite of behavior. See you next time.